guys, today I'm going to be doing a book review on The Late Mrs. Willoughby by Claudia Gray. The Late Mrs. Willoughby is book 2 in the Mr. Darcy and Miss Tilney series by Claudia Gray. Jonathan Darcy and Juliet Tilney find themselves reunited at a party to celebrate John Willoughby's inheritance. But no sooner does the party start and Willoughby's wife suddenly dies. Jonathan and Juliet team up once more to investigate what appears to be murder, and find themselves in peril with fear that the killer may strike again. So, the very first book in this series was The Murder of Mr. Wickham, and I really highly enjoyed the first book. Yes, the first book definitely had some issues and some problems, but I, for the most part, I really had a great entertaining time with it. That's kind of the word that really kind of flies out with me when I think of that very first book, The Murder of Mr. Wickham. It was just thoroughly entertaining. And yeah, just this wonderful blend and mashup of all your favorite Jane Austen characters in one book. And yeah, Mr. Wickham dying, you know, how much we all want that. Unfortunately, this second book was a little lackluster for me, you guys. That being said, there were still things about it that I liked and enjoyed, but I did find myself getting a little frustrated and irritated with just kind of some of the plotting and pacing, and I feel like this book could have been shorter. You know, it's not a very long book to begin with, but I just really feel like it could have been a bit shorter, cut out some of the miscellaneous random side plots that need to be there, because quite honestly, whenever the book would kind of veer away from the main murder mystery, I kept going, stop, I want to go back, I want to know who killed the late Mrs. Willoughby. But yeah, even with frustrations with this book, I'm still glad it exists, you know, because I remember reading the very first book, The Murder of Mr. Wickham. I remember thinking, oh, that'd be so great if Claudia Gray spins this out into like a little murder mystery series, you know, featuring Jane Austen characters. And so, yeah, I was thrilled when this second book was announced. And guess what, you guys? There is a third book coming out. No sooner did this book come out, and then the title of the third book popped up, that one being called The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. So I guess that's going to have much more of like a Pride and Prejudice focus on it, it sounds like, I'm assuming. So let's head a little deeper into what's actually going on in this book. At the start of this book, Jonathan Darcy, who is the son of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, yes. Jonathan Darcy, he has been invited to go to Mr. Willoughby's like homecoming or whatever it is. Mr. Willoughby has inherited a brand new house, so Mr. Willoughby has invited like his past schoolmates, former schoolmates, to come join him at this homecoming, home-warming party of his new inheritance, I guess. Which was kind of just weird to me. Like, is Willoughby, seriously, is Willoughby that young? Because Jonathan strikes me as being very young himself, like him and Willoughby being like this exact same age. I don't know, I find that kind of a little weird. Because then, yeah, in this universe, that would make like Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy like up there in their 40s, I think. I don't know. There's just a lot of stuff, how Jonathan connects to Mr. Willoughby, that I was like, okay, so the timeline of some of the Jane Austen books are not like running at the same time, I guess. Either way, I digress there with how I'm a little confused about kind of how all the Jane Austen works are kind of tied in together with like time-wise, I guess. I don't know. Either way, Jonathan, he goes to this party that Willoughby is hosting for his new inheritance. In the meantime, Juliet Tilney, being the daughter of characters from is that Northanger Abbey, right? Northanger Abbey? I read Northanger Abbey, and I didn't really like it that much, so I think it was Northanger Abbey. So yeah, Juliet, in the meantime, from the previous book, Juliet has made friends with Marion Brandon from Sense and Sensibility. So she has been kind of invited to spend some time with Marion Brandon, and yeah, of course, everybody kind of being in the same general area, everybody winds up at this party being hosted by Mr. Willoughby and his wife, Mrs. Willoughby. And of course, you guys, what happens? Mrs. Willoughby, the title spoils it for you right there. Mrs. Willoughby up and dies. And at first, there's a suggestion, oh, it was suicide, dear God, because she was clearly very unhappy in her marriage to Mr. Willoughby. But yeah, of course, we have Juliet and Jonathan, who solved the previous murder of Mr. Wickham. Of course, they're like, yeah, this is murder. We should investigate. Because they're much better than the cops, it seems. And yet, joining Jonathan and Juliet is another new character who has connections and ties to Jonathan Darcy, who's like a former schoolmate as well, as a guy named Rafe Bamber. So this, in turn, creates a nice little love triangle, yeah, guys, full of classic miscommunication, you know, classic Jane Austen miscommunication between characters. And I just love and adore the characters of Jonathan and Juliet. You know, Juliet, as she is presented in this book, she is still very much a young woman of this time period, which I really appreciate what Claudia Gray does with Juliet, because Juliet is not like some modern day feminist, you know. Juliet still is really confined into what she should historically be for this time period, but at the same time, she's still a woman who's really kind of brash and daring and really smart and intelligent, and yes, she's willing to kind of think outside of the box and kind of throw herself out there, and yes, she doesn't want to defy propriety or convention, but in order to solve a murder, she's going to. So I love Juliet being kind of a classic Jane Austen heroine in this book, but yeah, not to the point that she's like way too modern. That would be unbelievable for this time period, you know. And then yeah, Jonathan Darcy, in the meantime, he's very much his father's son, you know. I have questions about Jonathan, because I think some of his personality traits came through in the very first book, but like there's definitely a lot more of his personality traits that are adapted within here. And it seems like Claudia Gray is making Jonathan like he's kind of mildly autistic, and perhaps even mildly like asexual, perhaps. I'm not quite sure. Maybe kind of a blend of both those things. Because he definitely, we figure that Jonathan, he's very quiet. He's really specific about certain things. He doesn't like to be touched. He doesn't like to be in like crowded places. He's very specific with how things should be. Yeah, and even when he talks with Juliet, like he doesn't look her in the eye. He kind of like looks to the side of her rather than directly looking at her. So it's a pretty big deal when the two of them actually lock eyes with one another. So I think Claudia Gray is kind of making Jonathan this kind of how I'm interpreting it. He's mildly autistic, it seems, like what that would kind of look at and feel like in this type of setting, perhaps. So as I already mentioned earlier, what worked for me with this book, anytime it dealt with the murder investigation of Mrs. Willoughby, I liked all of that. I had a lot of fun with that. And the thing is, I wish the book would just stick with that. Any side plots, I was like, oh, Jesus. Like, as much as I love the characters from Sense and Sensibility, anytime I went to Eleanor and Edward, that had nothing to do with the main plot, you know? So I found that really frustrating, their side plot. Now, I did like the side plot that dealt with Beth and Colonel Brandon. I really liked their side plot, because at least Beth had kind of a little bit more going on, like she could possibly be a suspect, you know? And speaking of suspects, what also was not really working for me with this book, here's the thing. The very first book in this series, The Murder of Mr. Wickham, that has a massive amount of Jane Austen characters together. There's like a suspect list of a good 10 characters in that first book. So it really broadens and fleshes out the narrative of that book, that any one of these people could be the killer of Mr. Wickham, you know? So the problem with this book, the suspect list is very small and very self-contained. Juliet and Jonathan, they pretty much rule out a good chunk of people, and they narrow it down to like 3 people that it could be. So that doesn't make this book like really overwhelmingly exciting or thrilling or anything, because our protagonists are just circling around the same little small group of people, and it feels like it just doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't flesh out anything. And another problem, pretty much immediately from the get-go with this book, I don't know how I figured it, I figured out who killed Mrs. Willoughby, like, immediately. So when you do get to the big reveal who killed Mrs. Willoughby at the end of this book, it's lackluster, it's anticlimactic. You know, in other murder mystery books, if I figure out a killer fairly early on, sometimes it doesn't really frustrate me, because the way the narrative is told and the way the writer tells the story, they're still just threading in so many various different, you know, plots and twists and turns and characters that it still leaves me guessing, you know, but like in the background, I'll still always have the kind of the one person that I'm like, okay, I think it might be this person, you know. But yet in this book, I never felt that way. The person that I thought it was, that's who I thought it was from start to finish, and that's who it ended up being. So overall, book 2 in this series was a bit of a disappointment, but at the same time, I still really enjoyed it. Weirdly enough, I liked it. I like Jonathan and Juliet, you know. I'm here for their budding romance and waiting for them to get together, because you know they will at some point, totally. We definitely know there's a third book coming. I don't know how long Claudia Gray intends for this to like span out, if it's going to be just the 3 books or if it's going to be 4, 5, 6, 10, I don't know. So yeah, a bit of a disappointment. I just wish this book would have been maybe condensed down a little bit. I think just maybe perhaps the overall execution of this book didn't entirely work for me, I guess. Now, I definitely do recommend, I don't know, I feel like this particular book especially, I feel like you have to have read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. With The Murder of Mr. Wickham, I feel like you could honestly kind of jump into that book and not be too terribly confused, like you're missing out on anything if you've not read all of Jane Austen, or if you just have no familiarity with Jane Austen. But yeah, for some reason, this book, I just kept thinking, man, you can't just jump into this book. I think you really need to be rather familiar with kind of what went down in Sense and Sensibility, plus certain things from the very first book in the series are really pivotal to what goes down in this book at times. So yeah, you also just can't pick this book up randomly. You definitely need to read the first book and then this one. You know, this does not stand alone, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, despite some issues that I had with this book, I'm still really excited for the third book, because who knows, maybe that'd be a lot better, you know? I don't know. Or it could be worse, God knows. But yeah, I'm still excited for the third book. I like the characters enough that I want to stick with it, you know, even if some of the books are a little bit lackluster in the series. So you guys, that is it for my thoughts and feelings on the late Mrs. Willoughby. In the comments below, have you guys read this particular series, or this latest installment at least? Just let me know your thoughts down below. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye guys.